When I think about leadership, it's easy to default to the world's definition, the very thing that the apostles were discussing as they walked behind Jesus. They were arguing about this. So Mark goes out of his way to actually use this word, argue. This wasn't like a friendly discussion. Success by the world's standards often means things like power, recognition, position, accomplishment. What Jesus is about to do is teach them, and every one of us, that true leadership has to do with significance and not success. Because he's saying, you must. He's not saying you should, but you must. If you want to be great, you must. So, in other words, it's pretty definitive. He's pretty clear about this. There's a real difference between success and significance, as I pointed out in a talk I gave to the parents at the school a couple of weeks ago at the Meet the Teachers night. And it really has practical significance, as I'll sort of talk about later on. Success, as the world often defines it, is about things like personal achievement, good grades, awards, promotions, wealth, status, having powers of position over others, or having authority over others. But significance goes beyond and is deeper than personal success. It's about making a lasting impact on the lives of others, about living a life rooted in values and purpose. And again here, it's not about success being wrong or evil or sinful, but what is a priority in our life? What is going to lead the other? Or what is going to allow the other to flourish? It's really about serving them. It's really about serving them and not being served by them. And from the get-go, hopefully everyone understands, should be clear that serving in this context is not about giving people what they want, whether it's colleagues or friends or your children, not about giving them what they want, but helping them rather to get where they need to go. And that will have all sorts of implications in the practical order, helping them to get where they need to go. And this means at times denying them certain things, and teaching them maturity. Because maturity is the ability and the willingness to put off present desires for future rewards or for future realities. It's one of the marks of maturity. Perhaps you have struggled in this area of your own life. I think we all do from time to time. Success over significance. Do you feel the need to achieve more, to climb higher, or to be noticed in order to matter? The pursuit of success often creates stress, competition in an unhealthy way, tribes or cliques, divisions, and sometimes even isolation. Jesus challenges us to something much deeper today. There's a kind of leadership that isn't about success in a priority or primary sense, but about something much more, and it's really about significance. This is the type of leadership that leaves a lasting impact on others, not because of what you've achieved, but because of who you've lifted up. And Jesus talks about this kind of leadership in a way that turns everything we think we know upside down. We live in a world that often glorifies success, whether it's in business, academics, sports, or even within our own personal families. Success is often the ultimate goal. We've been taught to celebrate those who reach the top, those who are the greatest. But often, or how often, do we stop and ask, what does true greatness look like? Jesus makes it very clear what it looks like, but are we paying attention to him? And he knows better than all of us. And not only is true greatness, but what true greatness will translate into the fulfillment of one's life, which means happiness. We admire leaders who are strong, confident, and victorious. But in that constant push for success, we sometimes overlook the importance of serving others, of elevating others around us rather than ourselves. In our collective pursuit of success, we've all probably experienced moments when we've felt insignificant because we weren't winning according to the world's standards. As a side, one of the greatest coaches of all time, who's been acknowledged as one of the greatest coaches of all the sports of the last century, is a man named John Wooden, who was the coach of the UCLA Bruins. John Wooden was a man who taught some of the greatest athletes that ever came out of college into the NBA. People like, you got to be a little older to know this, but like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and many other great athletes like him. And he coached them, he would not allow them to think about winning a game. He would not allow them to think about winning a game. Certainly he would not allow them to think about winning the championship. What he coached them for and formed them hard is to bring out the best of themselves each day, to bring a number 10 out of 10 to their practice. The full attention every single day, every practice, every game. He would, even at halftime, when they were in the championships, he would not allow them to talk about winning. That blinds you to what you're supposed to do now. It blinds you to what your opponents are doing, because all we want to do is win, 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 win. This resulted in 10 NCAA championships. So it was actually very successful. But he would not allow them to think in those terms. He said, no, you got to bring a 10 to every practice. Now that has implications. If you unpack that, just mean you show up and put yourself into an outlet and all of a sudden you're a 10. It means you're going to bed at the right time, you're getting up at the right time, you're eating properly, you're doing your studies, because he also accentuated the importance of studies. So it has all sorts of reverberating consequences in our life. So impactful was John Wooden. He died at 99 years of age. Now, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, just one example, but there were other athletes present when he died. When you go to college, you're 18 to 22. So Abdul-Jabbar left at 22 years old, UCLA, and then he went on to play with the LA Lakers. At 99, so we're talking probably 40, 50 years later, Abdul-Jabbar is at John Wooden's bedside when he was dying. And there were several other players like Bill Walton. Talk about a man of significance. He emphasized significance even though everybody knew this man was like a grand chess master when it came to the basketball court. But he also, Abdul-Jabbar said, other than my father, when I went to play for John Wooden, I learned how to be a man. That speaks volumes about significance. I learned how to be a man, from Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. No focus on winning, but being prepared, operating as a team, practicing hard every day. The question is, what kind of leaders do we really want to be? In the gospel of the day, we see the disciples having this conversation. It's really an argument that brings out their misunderstanding of leadership and greatness. And the mother of James and John has bold enough and kind of silly enough to go to Jesus and say, I want you to have my son sit on your right and left hand. And Jesus said, look, if you knew what you were asking, you would actually wilt before me. Because if I showed you the suffering you're going to encounter in order to be a disciple of mine, you're not prepared for this. So they were arguing about who would be the greatest. And like many of us, they were caught up in this idea of success. But Jesus responds in a way that flips their idea of leadership right upside down when he says, anyone who wants to be first must be the very last and servant of all. Must be the very last and servant of all. This doesn't mean I give my leadership away, but it speaks to my interior attitude in leading others. It's a massive difference. Jesus redefines greatness as servanthood. When he says himself, the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. He is the only one, strictly speaking, who had the right to be served. And he said, I'm setting an example for you, how you should treat one another. I, the Son of God, the one through whom you were created, am serving you. And he would even get on his knees and wash their feet at the Last Supper. in Jesus' time. So to illustrate this, he also says this child, and he says, whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me. You say, well, that's kind of nice. So maybe it's even a little cutesy that he would use this example of children. But this was really radical. And in order to understand this, in the time of Jesus, children had that amount of status. Nada, nothing, zero. They had no influence, no power. And don't think the disciples didn't get this. They were among the least important members of society. A Roman father could put his child to death without any legal worries. So what Jesus is saying is truly radical. Leadership isn't about climbing to the top. It's about humbling ourselves to serve the least and the overlooked, the very things that he did. In God's kingdom, leadership is not about the size of the platform that we have, but about the willingness to serve others as Jesus Christ did. He poured himself into his disciples. For 3 years, he focused. He didn't worry about, although he was here to save the world, he didn't worry about going to all the masses. He took these 12 imperfect individuals, and even amongst the 12, he spent inordinate amount of time with 3 of them. And he said, basically, he poured himself into these individuals. He raised them up, he formed them, he corrected them constantly, redirected them, so that they could carry the gospel to everyone they came into contact with. So what does this mean for you and me? Jesus calls us to redefine leadership in our lives. Instead of striving for success and recognition, what would it look like for us to prioritize significance? Well, this has several implications. But this is the central idea of the leadership team here at Corpus Christi, which is kind of the center of our 10-year vision. I do not lead a team, but rather I lead from a team. Anybody in managerial positions knows the difference between this, and it's easy to say, it's very difficult to actually live out. So it's not leading a team, but leading from a team. It takes communication, it takes clearing up under misunderstandings, and for the most part, it takes the leader, who's me, because I'm the pastor, allowing others to actually speak up, put their ideas on the table, because it's very easy for a priest just to say, this is the way I want it, and everybody says, yes, Father. This is not a way to grow. This is not a way to grow. It's not a way to get other ideas, and it's not easy, because we all have egos, and I have an ego like everybody else. But there has to be a reminder, myself, over and over and over again. So it's acknowledged by everyone as being the game changer in any parish renewal. And in fact, it would probably make for a much better business as well. Also, when it comes to practical application, it means if parents put significance over success, they will actually make time to bring their children to Mass, whether Saturday night or Sunday morning, rather than have their Sunday morning or Sunday morning and Saturday evening filled with all sorts of activities that are good in and of themselves, like sports, language, music, all these things. But if they sort of overwhelm the significance, God is much more significant than any language or sport, then they're basically telling their children that God doesn't matter. You just fit him in whenever you can, which often becomes never in a world that is increasingly rejecting God's place in our life. So it has very specific practical implications, and we communicate this by our behavior. It doesn't matter what you say, but it's a matter of what we do. So it's significance over success. The children will become successful if they have their priorities straight. But it's often priorities that are mixed up. So think about where God has placed you in your job, your community, your family. Who are the little children around you, and little children in air quotes? Who are the people that might be overlooked, who are undervalued and feel insignificant? Jesus calls us to serve them. Whether you're a parent, a business leader, a student, a friend, your greatest impact won't come because of the titles you've earned or the accolades you receive. It will come from the people you lift up, the ones you encourage, and the lives you touch through humble service. Your leadership will be defined by the significance of your love, not the success of your accomplishments. Consider what it would look like if all of us were to really take this to heart. I've mentioned some practical implications of this. If we stopped striving for success at the expense of others and started seeking significance by serving. Imagine what our workplaces, schools, and families would look like if we followed Jesus' example of servant leadership. We would be a community that doesn't measure greatness by who's in charge or by who's willing, but rather by who's willing to serve. We would be known not for our achievements, but by the way we make others feel valued, the ones that we consider important enough to pour ourselves into, to be seen and loved. And I don't mean, when I say love, I mean in the will to for the good of the other as the other, to build them up, to help them to get where we would like to think God wants them to be, or where it's going to lead to their true fulfillment. This will often lead to sacrifices on my part and sacrifices on the part of the individual. This is the kind of leadership that leaves a legacy, one built on not on success, but on significance. So as a practical takeaway this week, I challenge you to take one practical step towards servant leadership. Identify one person in your life who might feel overlooked or undervalued. Maybe it's a coworker, a neighbor, a friend, or it could be a spouse for all that matter. How can you serve them? How can you elevate them and make them feel truly significant? As you do, remember Jesus' words. Whoever wants to be first must be the very last and the servant of all. True leadership isn't about getting ahead. It's about lifting others up. Let us be people who really lead with significance and not success.